And odd action. Today on History You Should Know, the epic conclusion to the real-life Game of Thrones. This is the Wars of the Roses. That's right, I have a dire wolf. I have a dire wolf too! No Alaskan Malamutes were harmed in the making of this video. And yes, that's an Alaskan Malamute, not a husky. And boom, now you know. So heavy. Tap on the playlist down there. Watch the previous episodes. Trust me, you're gonna need it. Sit on your throne, relax, and enjoy the video in all its glory. Today is August 22, 2023, and the geek and the actor in me are both very happy. Ask me why. Ask me why. Because on this day, exactly 538 years ago, the Wars of the Roses, this story that I've been telling you for the past 6 episodes, plus prequel, came to an end. So let's go there. August 22nd, 1485. King Richard III of England traveled all the way to Leicester at the head of an army. He was there to destroy his last enemy and would-be usurper, Henry Tudor. Pagdating niya sa Bosworth Field, natuwa siyang mas marami sila kaysa sa kalaban. Across the battlefield stood Henry Tudor's army. It was made up of angry nobles, some mercenaries, Welsh soldiers, Woodville supporters, and the last man who could possibly claim the throne, Henry Tudor himself. They all had one thing in common. They wanted to get rid of Richard, the last York and the last Lancaster. Only one can remain. But elsewhere on the field stood a third army, one led by Thomas Stanley, Richard's ally, but also Margaret Beaufort's husband, and therefore Henry's stepfather. He was there for a reason only he knew. Bago ang laban, ginawang hostage ni Richard ang isa sa mga anak na lalaki ni Stanley. He threatened to kill his son unless he pledged to help the king. Stanley's reply, "Sire, I have more sons." Wow! Thomas Stanley, like his wife, survived the Wars of the Roses because no one quite knew what he was thinking. And today was no different. He pledged to neither side. Nandoon lang siya para maghintay. But that morning, Richard's priority was the Tudor army. He knew it was being led by commanders instead of Henry. It was almost insulting to him that Henry couldn't even lead his own army. Lamang siya sa experience at mas marami pa siyang sundalo. He won't lose now. Not to this inexperienced Welsh nobody. It was time to attack. Finally, the fight was on. At first, the soldiers were empowered by shouts and rallying cries, but soon everyone was thinking the same thing: survive at all costs. Kill them before they kill me. It was brutal and unbelievably violent. Soldiers were hacking, stabbing, and slashing left and right, dying on top of one another. Habang nasa gitna ng laban, napansin ni Richard na hindi sila umuusad. Kahit mas konti ang kalaban, hindi nila mapaatras. He looked again at Stanley's army. They're still watching. Screw them. He'll deal with them after the battle. So he called on his reinforcements to come forward. But just like the third army, they also refused to move. Richard finally understood what was happening. He had one move left. From where he was, he could see Henry with his guards. And so, reining in his horse, he rallied his troops, and in a flash, he charged at the young Tudor. The king rode at full speed, stabbing and skewering anyone in his path with his lance. He managed to kill Henry's standard bearer, but as Richard prepared to attack Henry Tudor himself, shouts erupted behind him, and as he looked over his shoulder, he saw Thomas Stanley's army riding towards the battle, and he was relieved. He was gonna win after all. But in a split second, his relief turned to despair when he realized that Stanley's men decided to side with Henry Tudor. At ngayon, nasa likod na siya ng enemy lines at malayo sa mga kakampi. Richard, the hardened war veteran, badly miscalculated and underestimated Henry Tudor. Desperately out of options, King Richard III chose to keep going forward deeper into the enemy ranks. He will kill Henry or he will die trying. And if he was gonna die, he was gonna die a king. Kahit napapaligiran na siya ng kalaban, pinilit pa rin niyang abutin si Henry. One by one, his soldiers were overwhelmed. Richard III was alone. And with his sword drawn, suddenly, a crushing blow landed on the back of his head. King Richard III, the last Yorkist king, died in the midst of his enemies. And in his final moments, he created one final piece of history by being the last English king to die in battle. No man may have been able to take him down, but two women certainly did the job: Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth Woodville. Thomas Stanley rushed to the dead monarch. He pulled off his crown, knelt at Henry Tudor's feet, and presented him with the crown of England. Henry Tudor entered Bosworth Field as an outcast. He left as Henry VII, King of England and the head of a new dynasty, the Tudors. Being a Lancastrian, he fulfilled his promise to marry Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville's daughter, Elizabeth of York. This union signified the merging of the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York to form a new emblem, the Tudor rose. These 30 years of conflict and betrayal among brothers, cousins, husbands, wives, uncles, nieces, basically family, defined medieval England. George R.R. Martin, the author of the series A Song of Ice and Fire, aka Game of Thrones, openly credits the Wars of the Roses as his inspiration. Just between us, Game of Thrones is cool and all, and I love it, but do you know what actually pushed me to tell you this story in 8 videos? It's not what happened in the 1400s, but it's what took place in our lifetime. Pagkamatay ni Richard III, hinubaran at binaboy pa ang bangkay niya. He was paraded and displayed in the city of Leicester, so everyone would be sure he was dead. Afterwards, he was dumped in a plain grave in Greyfriars Church in Leicester. From that point on, he was both remembered and forgotten. Remembered as a villain in history when a certain William Shakespeare secured his reputation as the ultimate anti-hero. After all, Shakespeare wrote in the time of his patron, Queen Elizabeth I, the granddaughter of Henry VII. So, painting Richard as a villain would have been perfect brownie points. Richard was also forgotten because of history's worst husband, Henry VIII. I made 2 episodes about him. Go watch. It's fun. Nang gawin niyang Protestant ang England, na-dissolve ang Catholic churches sa buong bansa kasama ang Greyfriars Church kung saan nakalibing si Richard III. Through history, the site changed and eventually it was lost to time. 2012, Leicester, England. British historian Philippa Langley was walking around a car park. She was looking for something. Not her car, something more important. For the past 7 years, this has been her goal. Habang naglalakad siya, meron siyang nararamdaman. Alam mo yung feeling na kapag naglalakad ka sa sementeryo tapos nakatapa ka ng nicho nang hindi sinasadya? Ganun. And funnily enough, she felt that in a space marked with a letter R, which stands for reserved. Taking it as a cosmic sign, she raised funds and gathered her team. And after a couple of weeks, they were ready to dig. Lo and behold, they found bones. It was someone's grave. Pero kanino? Did this skeleton with a destroyed skull and showed signs of scoliosis belong to the person she'd been looking for all these years? As it turns out, after a couple of tests, she was right. Philippa Langley found the body of King Richard III after missing for 527 years in a car park. In 2014, his remains were transferred and buried in Leicester Cathedral. This story, to me, is the coolest part of this whole saga and a reminder of how history is something that will always be around us. That's why I love talking about it so much. That's why I'm so passionate about it. And as I always say, it's important to know where you came from so you'll know why things are the way they are today. And most importantly, you'll know what to do and what not to do tomorrow. Phew! I hope you enjoyed this mammoth series that took 7 months to complete. Life happens, that's why. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Follow for more, and boom! Now you know. Wrong Stark. Ned Stark is the right Stark, is the great Stark, is the best Stark,